In an article titled Critical Theory as a Hermeneutic, published in August 2020, Kevin Watson wrote,
In December of 2019, I graduated with a BA in philosophy from a secular university. At this secular university, I was immersed in ideas such as critical theory and Marxism, since these views dominated the philosophy department. Having become fascinated in philosophy through a crisis of faith that led me to Christian apologetics in high school, I found these views confusing and troubling at first. Seemingly everyone around me who was not a Christian bought into these views, and one was heavily looked down upon for disagreeing, if not outright silenced. At times, this discouraged me, though in many ways I loved the university. Practically no class that I took in philosophy fit my interests. In spite of that, I'd come to appreciate my experience there and to believe that, though I didn't necessarily plan to attend the school, God's plans were to leave me there and bless me there. One way in which my experience at this secular university uniquely prepared me as an apologist is that I got to see critical theory and Marxism from the lens of those who believed it passionately. My classmates were active members of the LGBTQ community, people who supported everything that the Black Lives Matter organization stood for, and self-identified radical third-wave feminists. Many of these classmates believed that Christianity was the religion of the oppressor. As a white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian man, I found myself in a bit of a lion's den. My experience with these classmates, who I still loved and desired to come to know Jesus as their savior, taught me a vital lesson. This lesson concerns how critical theory operates in the belief system of the one who adopts it. Critical theory, though not monolithic, can be summed up in 7 points, which come from the apologist Neil Shenvi. These are as follows. Individual identity is inseparable from group identity as oppressed or oppressor. Oppressor groups subjugate oppressed groups through the exercise of hegemonic power. Different oppressed groups find solidarity in the experience of oppression. Our fundamental moral duty is freeing groups from oppression. Lived experience is more important than objective evidence in understanding oppression. Oppressor groups hide their oppression under the guise of objectivity. Individuals at the intersection of different oppressed groups experience oppression in a unique way, that is, intersectionality. Now let's think of these 7 points as core beliefs of critical theory. Critical theory, although not technically a worldview, functions like a worldview. It colors our view of the world. Worldviews work like a lens through which we see, experience, and interpret the world. What does it mean to look at the world through a lens such as this? In light of the murder of George Floyd, does it perhaps look like protests and riots for some concept of racial reconciliation? When the beliefs central to critical theory are applied to race, then doesn't this result in a wholly new way of looking at race relations in the United States? I think that critical theory supplies its adherents with a particular lens through which to see the world. When applied to race, this results in what I call the colored lens of critical race theory. This lens provides the adherents of critical theory with an alternative hermeneutic, or way of interpreting events in our society. A recent paper in the journal Philosophia Christi shed light on this for me. The paper is called The Revolt Against Accountability to God, a global hermeneutical perspective on contemporary moral philosophy. In this paper, the Christian philosopher C. Stephen Evans defends a notion of what he calls a global hermeneutical perspective from a Christian perspective. global hermeneutical perspectives, hereafter GHPs, seek to show that human behavior can be explained in terms of deeper motivating factors that are universal, that is global to mankind, and by which human behavior can be understood, i.e. hermeneutic. Examples of GHPs can be seen in Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche. In his article, Evans seeks to show that the claims of the Christian worldview provide a distinct GHP, which he calls the no-neutrality thesis. The no-neutrality thesis claims that humans were created to serve God and be in relationship with him, and that every action that one undertakes is either in line with this design for humanity or not. In other words, every person is either a friend of God or a rebel. No one is neutral with respect to God.
In his letter to the Galatians, St. Paul wrote,
"You are all sons of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus."
Christ Jesus is the Logos, the universal reason. In Christianity, truth is sacred and identity is not. This used to be the same for Cardiff University. Indeed, the motto of the university is truth, unity and concord. However, this is no longer the case. The university has been influenced by postmodern ideas that push the belief that all of Western philosophy, all the way back to Plato, has been logocentric, and that this is a bad thing. The university now prioritizes feelings over reason. Traditional Christian values have been inverted. When once truth was sacred and identity was not, now identity is sacred and truth is not. A common understanding of the sanctity of truth provides a bulwark against tribalism. When truth is no longer regarded as sacred, unity and concord fall with it. In 2022, Race Council Cymru held a webinar to celebrate the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Race Discrimination. Professor Charlotte Williams was a guest speaker.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much, Uzo, and thanks to all for having me speak today. It's absolutely wonderful to speak to such a committed audience, an audience that's here committed to the elimination of racism. And people often ask, and they often ask me, what can change racist attitudes and behaviours? And education, as you heard our chair say, is absolutely key to this. And what a great place to start in this conference when thinking about the elimination of racism is the children of the nation. They represent the opportunity for change into the future. And of course, I'm going to say it again and boast it as many times as I can. In November of 2021, Wales became the first nation in the UK to make mandatory Black, Asian and minority ethnic education within the new curriculum. And this represents a historic step in education policy and practice in Wales. In the education section of the newly entitled Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, the government has signalled the new curriculum for Wales as the centrepiece of the national mission.
Reporter Jonathan Sacerdoti was not impressed with the Anti-Racist Action Plan.
It's so strange, isn't it, that the only people who actually don't get protected by anti-racism rules are, it seems, white people, and Jews. I think that this is just symptomatic, this move by the Welsh Government now to introduce this effort to make Wales anti-racist by 2030. It really says something, that they think that Wales is this hotbed of racism, and that also we can wait till 2030 if it is, in order to get rid of that. But this whole report, I tried to get through it. It's absolutely turgid, interminable, full of jargon. impenetrable. But if you do plough through it, you see that it's full of all this DEI nonsense, full of talk about BAME, which it defines as black, Asian and minority ethnic. So I'm not sure why we have to mention black and Asian, because they would come under minority ethnic, which in my days used to call ethnic minority, but apparently flipping it round somehow makes it different. All of this just shows that the effort is to try and obfuscate and also to try and re-racialise our society.
Yes.
Because this constant obsession on people's race is actually doing the opposite of what people like Martin Luther King wanted, which is that we shouldn't see colour in each other. We should actually see the kindness and goodness of each other's personalities and abilities, and that we should treat each other equally. But I think that efforts like this one are obsessively focusing particularly on the white majority in this country or in Wales and saying, you guys are racist. The more you say you're not racist, the more you must be racist because you don't even know it.
Well, I think,
and we know that the new curriculum states as one of its 4 purposes the ambition to enable all learners to become ethical and informed citizens of Wales and the world. And I want to talk a little bit about the significance of the report that was produced, this groundbreaking step in educational policy in Wales, and encourage you to read the report and its 51 recommendations. And it's entitled Communities' Contributions, Cynefin, Black, Asian and Minority Ethnicities in the New Curriculum. Sadly, there's a lot of misunderstanding about racism. Too often, it's reduced to an individual level, looking at the behaviours or actions of particular individuals. And we know that that allows us to dodge systems and processes that perpetuate racism. What the Macpherson report years ago called a few bad apples, without looking at the institutions and the systems that through neglect, denial, promote exclusionary and racist assumptions and processes. The Black Lives Matter campaign showed us this.
Cardiff University postgraduate student and Black Lives Matter Cymru national campaigns organiser Liz-Ikie explains.
Black lives have been highly politicised through time and in a really negative way. It is clear that we need to be able to talk about our politics in black communities. It isn't that we don't have the infrastructure to some respectable level to help propel the black vote, nor can it be said that work such as this isn't making a difference, because actually I think it is. But there's definitely something more underlying why there isn't a more forceful momentum building behind the Black British vote. To me, it could be because the state of racism is so dire in the UK that it acts to suppress our ability to fully engage with the politics, further marginalising our voices.
Now, we know that there's considerable evidence of inequalities in our education system, and you'll hear something more of that as we go through this morning. A strong body of evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, speaks to disparities in attainment, to disparities in school experiences.
On the UK government website, there is a page published in 2019, Indian Ethnic Group Facts and Figures. The page shows that the proportion of Indian households that were comprised of married couples with dependent children was twice as high as the same measurement of the proportion of white households. And the proportion of Indian households that were comprised of lone parents with dependent children was just over half that of white households. Children from Indian households are more successful in school than their white counterparts and are far less likely to be excluded. People from an Indian background, on average, get paid more than their white counterparts. There's also a page for Black Caribbean Ethnic Group. The page shows that the proportion of black Caribbean households that were comprised of married couples with dependent children was less than the proportion of white households, and the proportion of black Caribbean households that were comprised of lone parents with dependent children was considerably more than that of white households. Children from black Caribbean households are less successful in school than their white counterparts, and are far more likely to be excluded. People from a black Caribbean background on average get paid less than their white counterparts. On the surface, you may think that the discrepancy between black Caribbean and Indian heritage was due to cultural factors. However, the Welsh Government have concluded that black and minority ethnic people do less well because of structural racism.
And let's also note the young people who demanded change and were demanding the government take forward this agenda. We all saw the wonderful Angel Ezeadum speaking in the UK Youth Parliament. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly there, Angel, but it was wonderful to see.
Hi, my name is Angel Ezeadum. I'm 19. I'm from Cardiff, very local actually to here. I was part of the first ever Youth Parliament cohort. I then kind of found out more about the other ways to get involved rather than just through like constituencies. You can also get involved through the partner organisations. So I looked to see if there's any partner organisations that kind of fit my description and my identity. I found two actually, EYST with like ethnic youth support team I believe, and then Race Council Cymru.
What motivates your work?
I think I'll answer that question with a short story. There was a boy on the beach and an old man walked past and saw him. And this boy was reaching down, picking something up and throwing it to the sea. As the old man got closer, he saw that the boy was picking up starfish and throwing these starfish into the water. He looked and said, "My boy, what are you doing?" The boy said, "I'm throwing the starfish back into the sea." The old man pointed across the shoreline and said, "My boy, look, there are hundreds, millions of starfish here. What difference are you really making?" He picked up another one. He said, "I'm making a difference to this one," and threw it back in the sea. And that's what motivates me.
The peer reviewers in research undertaken by Race Alliance Wales and by
Race Alliance Wales is an organisation of a number of different groups who are working towards anti-racism. And today was our launch. We're sponsored by Jane Hutt, the Deputy First Minister. We're at the Senedd here, where the seat of power can listen to us.
And we found a woefully white workforce. But let's be positive. Our vision in this report was that every learner in Wales would have the opportunity to explore the diverse experiences and contributions of Black, Asian and minority ethnic peoples, past and present. And accordingly, that every teacher in Wales, in every area of learning and experience, will be equipped and resourced to meet those expectations. Oh, and there are schools, of course, signing up to the zero racism agenda.
Hi, I'm Nelly Adam, aka Queen Niche. In December 2020, we launched our Zero Racism Wales campaign, since which the Welsh Government has pledged to make Wales an anti-racist nation by 2030. So please, take your pledges at Zero Racism Wales today. Come and stand with me, and let's unite as a nation.
Back in 1933, this union voted in humiliating fashion the so-called Oxford Oath that they would not defend king and country. And that was used by people like Hitler, like Mussolini, to believe that the West was weak. Any civilization that will not defend its own values, any civilization that creates an equation between its own values and the values of groups like Hamas is weak. And that is not something the West can afford.
You've spoken about this issue about Israel and Palestine a lot in recent interviews. You've rightly condemned the atrocities that occurred on October 7th to innocent Israeli civilians. I tried to find videos of you condemning the deaths of innocent Palestinian civilians at the hands of the IDF or Israel, but I couldn't find any.
Right, because
so
I don't draw moral
I just wanted to ask you directly, will you condemn the deaths of innocent Palestinian civilians in the same way that you do innocent Israeli ones?
Absolutely not. And the reason I will not is because the killing is not done in the same way or with the same purpose. That's like saying that do I condemn? That's like saying, will I condemn the person who murders a baby in their bed by burning them alive the same way that I condemn the police officer who's trying to arrest that person and accidentally kill someone in the process? Of course not. Those are not the same thing, not remotely.
But there have been innocent... Do you not sympathise with the life of an innocent Palestinian child?
Of course I do. That's why Hamas should surrender today. Hamas should surrender today. This bullshit that it's Israel's responsibility to protect Gazan civilians in a way that Hamas doesn't have to protect Gazan civilians, or that what's happening right now is not the result of Hamas's terrorism and currently holding over 200 hostages, including babies, in custody. That's insane. Trying to draw a moral equivalence between people who are making targeted strikes against terrorists who are hiding underground in tunnels deliberately violating international law, in violation of the Geneva Conventions, holding the other side civilians underneath the ground while not providing their own people fuel, not providing them food, not providing them medicine, and that I'm supposed to equate Israel attempting to make targeted strikes with Hamas literally sending 2,000 terrorists across another nation's border and into civilian areas with no military goal, with purely the goal of murdering those civilians. Let me ask you, why exactly would you equate...
I'm asking you questions here, Mr. Shapiro.
You got several questions, so I'm asking... Honestly, I'm going to ask you the same question. Why would you...
I'm asking you the questions here. I find it really concerning that you're not prepared
Why won't you answer the question?
I find it really concerning that you're not prepared to condemn... To even admit that it's sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies.
Of course it's sad. I just said it's sad.
In the same way that it's sad when an innocent Israeli civilian dies.
Of course it's
Why are those two not equally saddening to you?
I'm of course incredibly sad when anybody who's innocent dies, but it is not the same evil when somebody murders a baby in their crib as when someone tries to kill a terrorist and that terrorist is hiding behind the baby. That's not the same thing.
But innocent Palestinian children have lost their lives.
Of course they have, and Hamas should be blamed for all of that, and Hamas should surrender today. Will you call on Hamas to surrender?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then we're in agreement. Great.
How about we start calling this an ethnic extermination? Yeah? An annihilation, an obliteration. This has gone above and beyond. And any person who walks past me again and asks me, but what about the 6 people? My only response to you is, what about the 41,000 Palestinians since October? We have literally now gone past being polite, trying to express to people, educate people, tell you why we're out here.
We know racism is pernicious, manifold and sustained. It's bad for our children, all our children. It's an abuse of human rights. No child should have to go to school and find themselves abused because of their background or their belief.
In 2019, it was reported that Wales has the highest proportion of anti-Semitic Google searches in the UK.
Lots of people think Britain might be heading for civil war. I'm going to fight the good fight. The mass immigration was the greatest act of harm in our history. We've had more immigration in the past 2 decades than in the past 2,000 years. I firmly believe that you have to defend what you believe in. We've been ideologically subverted as a nation. These radical extremist left-wing elements, they wanted essentially to have bombs in the streets and civil unrest and try to foment the discord and demoralization and destabilization.
Even when you have people on the streets of London calling for jihad, we have a police force that bends over backwards to understand jihad as meaning something innocent.
The Islamic population is the only population that has a birth rate that's increasing. You've got a generation of students who are being taught national self-loathing rather than love of nation. Sadiq Khan Dahan always tells us he's the son of a Pakistani bus driver very proudly. Pakistan is the global center of slavery. What sort of atrocity will actually finally motivate the British people to act? The revolution has already happened. Britain is a post-revolutionary society. This is my country. I was born here, and I will be British till I die. Islamophobia is a nonsense term. It shouldn't exist. No religion, no ideology should be free from criticism.
So, 20 or 30 years, what's your escape plan?
Well,
I'm Jonathan Sacerdoti. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, great to be with you. Thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Long admired your writings in The Spectator, and recently been cheering you on in your Oxford Union debate, so it's nice to actually meet you in person.
Well, thank you very much. I've long admired all your work. You're a great thinker and explainer of important things, so I'm pleased that we'll have this conversation today. And I thought maybe let's start with where we are as Britain today, because I know that you and I both commentate somewhat differently on the status of British society and many of the things that are wrong with it. What do you think at the moment is most wrong in British society?
Well, I think the most crucial thing I try to get people to understand, and not to be melodramatic about it, is that Britain is a post-revolutionary society. The revolution has already happened, and revolutions don't require mobs in the streets and red flags flying from rooftops. We've had a quiet revolution that's taken place over the course of decades, and it's led to the capture of all our institutions, and in a sense, we've been ideologically subverted as a nation. So the institutions of this country, from the civil service to all of our museums and galleries, to our legacy media, to our academia, to the parliament itself, they look the same. But the people who inhabit those institutions are cuckoos in the nest. They bear no comparison to the generations who actually build and run those institutions. And of course, it's institutions that set the tone for the culture of the nation. It's institutions that essentially mold minds. And what this has been called, people may be familiar with this term, the long march through the institutions. And that's what it is. There's been a long, slow, gradual, almost imperceptible march through institutions, which gathered speed under Tony Blair. But it actually goes back long before Tony Blair. And a lot of people tend to just view this as, oh, this is all about Tony Blair. And I know a lot of people now are talking about a great repeal bill. All we need to do is just reverse all of Tony Blair's terrible legislation, and we'll be back to some sort of normality. I'm afraid the problem is much deeper than that, because I'm sure most people understand now this is a global phenomenon. It's a Western phenomenon, I should say, very much a Western phenomenon, especially an Anglosphere phenomenon, and that's also quite important because this emanates from ultimately this culture which some people call woke. I call it American Marxism. I think woke is too much of a soft and cuddly term, emanated from America, and so you often hear people say, well, woke is a mind virus. It's true, but it's a mind virus transmitted through the English language. And of course, where is woke strongest? In the Anglosphere, then in Scandinavia and in the Netherlands, where of course English is as well spoken as English is. And the less countries speak English, the lower the degree to which you find left infiltration with these new ideologies of the new left or woke, or the progressive left. Now, how did we get to this position where, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, here, it seems as if the culture's gone completely topsy-turvy. We've seen gender ideology and critical race theory, post-colonial theory, decolonization, statues being pulled down, mass migration, Black Lives Matter. How did all of this come to be? Well, not to give too long of a history lesson, after the Russian Revolution, communists in Europe were puzzled and really distressed because they always assumed that the communist revolution would happen in the industrialized West. And where did it happen? It happened in agrarian cultures. It happened in feudal cultures in China and in Russia. And they realized that the foot soldiers of the revolution, those that were supposed to carry on the revolution, the proletariat, were actually small c conservative patriots, much like, of course, we found with the Red Wall voters who deserted the Labour Party and went over firstly to Boris Johnson and voted for Brexit because they also are small c conservatives. And suddenly they realized that although classical Marxism was all about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the oppressor and the oppressed, and the need to seize the means of industrial production to get control of the factories and all that, they realized that wasn't going to work in the West. The economics wasn't going to be the way to do it. They needed to change the mentality of the proletariat. They needed to seize the means of cultural production. So they needed to control all the things that make people patriotic. So the schools, the colleges, the newspapers, everything that essentially sets the zeitgeist for a nation. And so there was the chap who put this forward is a person called Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist And he developed this idea. And at the same time, you had in Frankfurt, in Germany, the rise of the Frankfurt School, which was deliberately looking at how we can actually have a communist revolution of sorts by using culture. Herbert Marcuse was one of the names some of your viewers may be familiar with. Then after the Second World War, people from the Frankfurt School went to America. No point living in Germany immediately post-war, and they went into the universities, particularly places like Berkeley in California and so forth. And suddenly these radical ideas began to permeate through American academia. And of course, by the time you got to, say, 1968, you saw the effects of this when you saw, of course, the students rioting and you saw so much unrest being fomented. The idea was working. And it was at this time that you began to get the rise of these radical extremist left-wing elements, things like the New Left. And these chaps wanted to have a revolution overnight. They wanted essentially to have bombs in the streets and civil unrest. And there was a chap called Rudi Dutschke who said, hang on, chaps, this is 1960s America. It's still very, very conservative, very patriotic. I mean, Americans love their country. We can't change their minds overnight. We need to have a long march through the institutions. We need to train a generation of students, indoctrinate them with these ideas, and they will then go into all of the other institutions as qualified teachers, professors, civil servants, government ministers, and so forth. That's how we do it. And he says we can't rely on the working man, because the working man is essentially still patriotic. We need to actually look at minorities, and minorities are going to be the foot soldiers of the revolution rather than the working class. So you're going to look at women, look at ethnic minorities, look at homosexuals and lesbians, look at trans and so forth. Basically, use the minorities and try to foment the discord and demoralization and destabilization through that. And as one political scientist put it very well, when he said, everyone thinks about Marxism as being this traditional economic Marxism of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but actually it's one of several species of Marxism. If you think of it like a cat is a genus of Marxism, but then you have leopards, tigers, tabby cats, jaguars. So traditional economic Marxism was the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But then you got radical feminism, and that was an attack on masculinity and the qualities of maleness that, of course, made Western civilization so great. Then you got Then you got gender queer theory, and queer theory was all about also attacking the family and masculinity. Then you also got things like critical race theory, which is again about attacking whiteness. And so these were all ways in which you were attacking the fundamental pillars that were the foundation of the success of Western civilization. And I find that analogy quite effective. And that's what we've seen. By the 1980s, of course, these people were being churned out of these universities, and that's what we've seen. In the 80s, the 90s, slowly, first in academia, elsewhere, we've seen this institutional capture. And what happened was, in the 1970s, there were organizations like Prairie Fire in America who put out pamphlets talking about things like white privilege, systemic racism, and these were such radical ideas. These pamphlets only circulated to around 100 people. They were things only spoken about in conspiratorial underground basements and so forth. Now, those radical Marxist ideas of critical race theory and so forth, decolonization, that's become part of mainstream academic life. And people who are perpetuating it aren't Marxists. I'm not saying this is a Marxist conspiracy, but at its root, they're Marxists. But the Overton window has shifted so much that you have well-meaning liberals, part of the Be Kind Brigade, who just think they're being nice, and they're actually promoting radical far-left Marxism. And at the golden core of it is an attempt to undermine Britain, America, and the West, and essentially to demoralize and destabilize the society, to disconnect us from any pride in who we are as a people, and by so doing, in essence, to introduce new myths and a new ideology, that diversity built Britain, for example, and essentially create a new society.
The vision is of an anti-racist Wales by 2030. And education has a significant role in creating this more equitable society. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.